Good morning, race fans. Okay, we are down to the nitty gritty final assembly on the Oldsmobile 350 DX conversion to gas. And as you can see, I've got my long block together, double roller timing chain with a cam button. It's a roller cam setup. I've talked before about what it took to get the bottom end together with the oil pan, the windage tray, the high volume oil pump, etc. So that's done. We won't be talking about that today. And there have been a few videos on this kind of conversion, but a lot of them are like the horsepower TV videos you see. I mean, these guys throw together an engine final assembly. It looks like there were never any problems to overcome. That has certainly not been the case. And nothing major, but you just, for you guys who might want to attempt this kind of conversion, I just want to inform you of some of the obstacles you're going to wind up encountering along the way, and it'll save you some money, believe me, because you don't want to buy parts 2 and 3 times. Okay, so I've got several little things I want to cover. Okay, and it's all to do with the top end today. Okay, so as you can see in my valley, there are a couple of differences from a gas block. The first is I simply had to drill and tap this open port that went to the back where the distributor usually is. There's a hole there in the diesel block. At least mine had it, a DX block. And you got to get a pretty decent pipe tap in there and then just plug it, because you don't want your valley, which is your crankcase, essentially open to the atmosphere. Right. Now the old small block Chevys, the old ones, from I think it's the mid '60s and down, had a kind of PCV setup here in the valley. I don't know what this was for in the diesel block, but for me it just needed to be plugged because I'm going to run a regular PCV valve. Okay. The other thing that's going to cause you maybe a little trouble is this boss, which is quite large. And it held the injector pump under the intake manifold in the diesel setup. Okay, so obviously I don't need the injector pump anymore. And there's no need to block this passage with anything, but there is a need to block the oil feed hole which comes up from the cam tunnel. So I told you guys before, all I did was I drove this little bearing in to cover the hole, and that's going to make sure I don't have an internal oil leak. Okay, so all I did was I took I think it was a socket or something like that, and just drove it in a little bit to cover the hole. So be aware of that. Okay. Where should I start? I think I should start with the biggest issue, which is the intake manifold, right? One of the things that caused the difficulty with this conversion is most of the aftermarket parts which are out there now designed for the Oldsmobile V8, the modern one, the 64 and up, are designed for big block, not a small block, which is the big block's got the taller deck height. And that's true for the cylinder heads. Now, I've gone over the cylinder heads quite a bit, and we talked about how much taller the ports are. Okay, so as far as intake manifolds, which you have to have a small block intake manifold because of the width, you've essentially got 2 that will work. That is the Edelbrock Performer RPM and the Edelbrock Victor, I believe, will work. But because of the camshaft I used and because of the RPM range I want to stay in, I definitely didn't want to use a Victor, which is kind of a race manifold. So I stuck with the Performer RPM. And here's the bottom. So I just want to show you, there's quite a bit of work involved in port matching this manifold in any kind of real way to those heads. But in the end, it does work. Okay, don't try to get away with actually, let me show you here again. Don't try to get away with using an Edelbrock Performer manifold or a stock one, because this is what you're going to end up with, right? This is how much material I had over the port with a regular Performer. You can see the red line is, the blue is the Performer and the red line is the RPM. You've got a good 3/8, perhaps maybe even half an inch more material on the RPM that you can grind out with, and the bolt holes do line up, so that's what you're going to need. By the way, just in passing, before I go back to the manifold, I'm interrupting, but I ended up with a custom length push rod, and that's the length I ended up with. So I bought a 8.350 push rod. You can see I've got my roller rockers here. I'll come back to that. That's important. Okay, back to the manifold. So here's your stock port height, and you can see all that material on the roof, right? And here's what I had to take out, right down to the red line, in order to make it work. And I want to say I had to take out a good 3/8 of material in order to make that work. And of course, you don't want to create a funnel, so I had to blend it in as deeply as I could. And I might even, I'm in there 3 inches, and I want to probably even go any further. I did not touch the floors whatsoever, and I didn't have to touch the sides, right? So I might have a tiny bit of a step, anywhere between 20 and 50 thousandths in these dimensions, but it's a step in the right direction. As a matter of fact, it might even prevent reversion a little bit, so I'm not worried about it. I also didn't go to the max dimension on the roof, which is all the action is on the roof. That's why you want to take the material out of the roof. That's where all the air-fuel mixture is. Contrary to what logic will tell you. Logic will tell you, well, gravity holds everything to the floor, but that's not true in an engine. The high speed, the velocity of that mixture keeps it, just like on your car on a road. The faster you go, the more you're going to get thrown to the outside, and the long dimension of the curb, which is on the roof, right? So you can see I took them all out on this side, on this bank, and I just have to do the other side. I might do a little work in the plenum up top or something, but I haven't touched it so far. Anyway, I just use an electric die grinder for that. I use a carbide that's meant for cast iron, and I keep it from loading up with some welding flux. The flutes, they do make, of course, aluminum carbide burrs, but the flutes are much wider in those, and I prefer the cast iron, even in aluminum work, because the problem with the wide flutes is they chatter as you're trying to work the material, and you just don't have the kind of control. Oh, by the way, I do use a speed control on this tool. You don't want to go top speed. There's my welding flux there. Okay. So that's the intake manifold issue you're going to have to deal with. There wouldn't be much point in bolting it on out of the box, because your roof is going to be down here, and you're going to create such a step, even though it's a step in the right direction, that what you're going to do is the second you hit this big dimension, you're going to lose all your port velocity. And probably what's going to happen is, this is a very well flowing cylinder head, but if you feed it with such a tiny orifice, you're going to kill the velocity, and your fuel is going to drop out of suspension and end up running down the ports, and you're going to run lean. You don't want to do that, right? So you'd like to get those intake manifold dimensions as close to these dimensions as you can without creating a funnel, like I said. And that's a much deeper subject than I'm willing to get into right now. I put a lot of thought into the way that I would work that intake manifold, and I came up with what I think is the best solution. Okay, next, I want to talk quickly about valve covers, but there's a little more to such a simple subject, because, like I said, I had to go with a custom length push rod. Right? I wanted to restrict the oil as well, and I wanted a strong push rod. When you go with a roller cam, you have spring pressure that's fairly high compared to a conventional flat tappet cam, and the last thing you want to do is use a set of $35 push rods, because they don't have the column strength. Now, since I wanted to restrict the oil to the top end anyway, because Oldsmobiles have that well-known oil return issue, you can see how small they are. And unlike a Chevy, you don't have anything in the back. You don't have the big holes in the back and the front. So I wanted to restrict the oil in the top end, and for that reason I used roller rockers. Pardon me, I'm getting over a cold. So the way I chose to do it, rather than putting restrictors in the oil, in the lifter galleys or anything like that, is I used a 112 wall push rod. Now it's a 5/16 push rod, which is about 300 thousandths in diameter. So if you think about it, if my walls are 112 thick, I'm about 80 thousandths in the orifice in the center, which is at least half of what a normal push rod is. Now when you buy real restricted push rods, they give you like a 50 thousandths orifice for the oil to get up through. But I figured I'd kill two birds, one stone here. Keep it simple. I don't want to restrict the oil too much. I mean, I've still got to cool my valve springs. But these roller rockers don't need much oil. So anyway, that's the solution I came up with, because I knew I was going to spend $120 or so on push rods anyway. So I was able to get these push rods. I think they're not fancy. I think they're Elgin push rods. And I was able to, they fell within the budget. So that's how I restricted the oil. Anyway, what does that have to do with valve covers? Well, these fancy looking roller rockers are actually not the expensive Magnum XD roller rockers. They look just like them because they're a Chinese knockoff from Speedmaster. And the price is about half, and they look pretty good to me. We'll see. Anyway, the poly locks they come with, this one here I have loose, are tall, right? Now, when you convert an Oldsmobile from the normal shaft rocker system to this, which is the Chevy Pontiac system, you have a problem with valve cover height, because the stock Oldsmobile valve covers are pretty low. I think they're about 2.5 inch. Well, there's no way this stuff is fitting under it. And they used to sell aluminum valve covers when Oldsmobiles were a little more popular. I've got a couple of sets. I've got a Holley set. I've seen the Mickey Thompson sets. The problem is those aren't even tall enough. I love aluminum valve covers, and especially the Finn Nostalgia type. Even those are not tall enough. I tried setting one on there to clear this gear. So there are tall Oldsmobile stamped steel cheap valve covers on the market, and that's what I ended up buying. 90% of them are in chrome. It's very hard to find the regular old painted steel ones, so I ended up getting a set of chrome ones. Right. Now let me show you. Even these, right? I don't like chrome because it retains the heat. Okay, even these, which are supposed to be 3 3/8 tall, are not quite sitting flat over my valve gear. And the reason for that is this baffle, internal baffle, is crashing into these tall poly locks. But I'm so close that there are two solutions I can adopt here. I can either get a thick valve cover gasket, which there are some 3/8 thick ones on the market. I think Edelbrock has them. SCE maybe. They're not cheap, but they are the good steel impregnated kind that you don't crush. Well, I mean, the third alternative too is that I could take that baffle out, but then I'm going to be leaking oil all over my nice chrome everywhere, so I don't want to do that. So I'm going to leave those in, and the other solution, of course, is to get some shorter poly locks, which they do sell. These are 7/16 20 poly locks, and I do have the room with the way this cam is set up to get just a shorter poly lock, and I won't crash into my roller rockers. So those are going to cost me $40. The thick valve cover gasket's going to cost me just about that much, so I don't know. I've got to choose what to do. Oh, by the way, you see that I have what do you call it? Guide plates that are the two-piece. And the reason for that is these Speedmaster ProComp aftermarket cylinder heads, which are a copy, as you know, of the Edelbrock Performer RPM cylinder heads. The rocker arm stud holes, which are 7/16 14, the coarse thread, are not drilled down deep enough to quite take a standard type replacement ARP rocker arm. You bottom them out, and believe me, you don't want to put a lot of torque on that. You're going to crash right down and wreck your cylinder head at the bottom of that hole. So what I had to do was get some thicker guide plates than the regular comp guide plates for an Oldsmobile, and I think those, I'm not sure where those came from, but at any rate, and they even took an extra washer so that they're not bottoming out. You can see the washer. And that's what it took. Now, if I had it to do all over again, and we're watching a video like this, I'm just going to tell you guys right now. If you buy the big block Chevy 7/16 rocker arm studs from ARP, which are a little shorter, but will do the job, I think you'll be all set, and you'll save yourself a lot of heartache. You'll never have to go through any of that. And you can use the regular guide plates. Because I think the shank beneath the stud is shorter, and the height above the stud, the shank is shorter too. Okay, so that's a hot tip for you. Anyway, these are the kind of things that happen in engine building. I mean, even these tall valve covers just won't quite clear for me, so I've got to deal with that too. Got to spend just a little more money before I'm done. Okay, what else? There are at least a couple more issues I want to alert you to. Oh, this is out of order, but the intake manifold. We talked in one of my other videos about oil splash from this valley, which, remember, all the oil is going to run down from the head. It's going to try to find these holes to get down to the bottom end. In the meantime, however, between that and the hydraulic action of the lifters, you could get a fair amount of oil splash in here, or mist at least. And if that's hitting the bottom of your intake manifold, especially if you have a stock head, which has the exhaust cross over here, which generates quite a lot of heat, you're going to be burning your oil. I showed you that on my other intake manifold. And your oil lubricity is going to go to hell very quickly. So but even with these heads, right, what I don't want is hot oil splashing the underside of my intake manifold, hitting these runners and heating them up, right, because that's going to vaporize my fuel. Now, if you're building a stop type engine, a stock engine, you want the fuel to be vaporized to some extent. It's going to make the thing run really smooth. But if you're looking for every last drop of street power the way I am here, sorry about the shavings, I haven't cleaned this thing off yet. I want those runners to run as cool as possible, so I do not want oil hitting the bottom. Now, who do you think would sell a solution for that? Nobody but Mondello, right? Here it is. This is a tray for the lifter valley in an Oldsmobile, and like most aftermarket parts, made out of aluminum, and it's designed for a big block. So they do actually issue a disclaimer when you buy this, and that is, if you want to put it in a small block, as we're doing here, you might have to modify it somewhat. Okay. Now, I actually have an Oldsmobile 350 sitting on a stand over there, a regular gas one, and I laid this tray in there, and it fit fine. You know, I wouldn't really have to do much, but you do have to drill and tap in order to secure it down. Now, in the case of the diesel block, you won't run into that problem if it's got the roller cam set up, because I've already got the 2 retaining screws on my Spider. So I lay that in, which, by the way, these are slotted to clear the push rods. On a small block Chevy, the ones they sell for the small block Chevy, they're not slotted, they're just drilled holes, and so you actually have to undo all your valve gear to get the push rods through. So this Mondello piece is great, because you don't have to do that. But I am crashing into my Boss for my diesel injector pump. Okay, so that's why I've drawn on this. This is material that I'm going to have to take out of this tray. Once I don't have that anymore, this should lay right in, and then I can screw it down I might come up with a couple of standoffs, and I can screw it down to where my roller cam spider sits. Now this has a spring action, so you have to hold the lifters. So you have to make sure that you don't compromise that spring action when you do it. But I can see by looking at this is going to work. So you can see when that stays in there, that's going to prevent a lot of oil splash from hitting the bottom of my intake manifold runners. This is one of those parts that uninformed guys will run without. And you're just giving away power, and you're actually compromising the longevity of the engine by not having it, because you could be cooking your oil. So I was glad that I was able to find that part. And as far as I know, fellas, you can see it says Mondello on it. Nobody but them are selling it. On the other hand, they did get it right in the mail to me the next day, and it was here a lot quicker than I thought from the West Coast. So that was great. All right. I think that's all I had for today. Right? Just tips and tricks. You're always going to run into problems with these conversions. So hopefully I've saved you some heartache. You have to become your own R&D department sometimes with these builds. And above all things, if that's the case, you've got to take your time. Don't promise a customer you can build an engine like this in 2 weeks, because it's just not going to happen. Okay, thanks for your attention, fellas. Bye.